So all through the Costa Rican culture, the Costa Rican language, are these Hebrew things. So now that you have that background, and you know who the Sephardic are, you know how the Sephardic got to Costa Rica, now let's go back to Bereshit 38. Now this is the opening slide that I read of how Judah meets Tamar. Now we have that, okay? We have that down. And Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of Yahweh, and Yahweh slew him. And Judah said unto Onan, Go into thy brother's wife and marry her, and raise up seed to thy brother. And Onan knew that the seed would not be his. And it came to pass that when he went in unto his brother's wife, that he spilled it on the ground, lest he should give seed to his brother. And the thing which he did displeased Yahweh, wherefore he slew him also. Now, this tells us very clearly that Judah understood the Levirate marriage that we find in Deuteronomy 25, 5 through 10. When brothers live together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the deceased shall not be married outside the family to a strange man. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her to himself as wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. It shall be that the firstborn whom she bears shall assume the name of the dead brother, so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel. We're all pretty familiar with that, even though it's a little strange for us today. But it was very common in that day because the inheritance of Israel was very, very, very important. Now, it's not a mandatory thing. We might think, poor Onan, he had to take this shrew Tamar for his wife, and he didn't want to have children with her, and it cost him his life. But it wasn't mandatory. Because it continues and says, But if a man does not desire to take his brother's wife, and his brother's wife shall go up to the gate of the elders and say, I don't want her. My husband's brother, and she shall say, my husband's brother refuses to establish a name for his brother in Israel. He is not willing to perform the duty of a husband's brother to me. Then the elders of the city shall summon him and speak to him. And if he persists and says, I do not desire to take her, then his brother's wife shall come to him in the sight of the elders, pull his sandal off his foot, and spit in his face, and she shall declare, Thus it is done to a man who does not build up his brother's house. In Israel his name shall be called the house of him whose sandal is removed. Beit Chalvutz Hanal. Now it's interesting that if you look at the roots of these two words, okay, Halvutz is to remove or cut from mooring. How many of you people have a boat or know anything about boats? The mooring is where you permanently put your boat. In the water, okay? It's where your boat stays when you're not actually out on the boat. It is the living place of the boat. And, of course, the hanal is a protective footwear translated in this day. Of course, they only wore sandals, of types of sandals. So it's the walk of your house. It's cutting the way that you live free. Okay, you're cutting free the way that your brother would have lived because he no longer has an inheritance. And it was kind of a heinous thing to do, but it was an option. And while it might have been embarrassing, you didn't die. But when you say to Yahweh, okay, I'm going to do what you say, and then you don't do it, there's a consequence for that. And that's what happened with poor Onan. But he did have an option. He chose not to take it. But I just say this to show you that Judah obviously knew about this. This is not something that came up later. Tamar was chosen by Judah to be the wife of his firstborn son, Er was wicked in the sight of Yahweh and slew him. Tamar was left without a child of promise or a claim to the inheritance of the tribe. First of all, we don't know if Tamar, where she came from, because the scripture doesn't tell us. But Judah was obviously out hanging out with the Adulamite and taking wives from Canaan. Judah had sort of departed from the right place. And he was wandering around in the nations where he wasn't supposed to be at this time. Okay? She was dispersed to Judah's second son, Onan. According to the Hebrew, the law of the Levirate union, Onan was to raise up seed Zerah for his brother, that they might claim the inheritance of the firstborn. This I see as the first exile of the Sephardic to the Iberian Peninsula. They were taken from Eretz Israel and they went out to Spain. When that happened, the motherland, the homeland, Eretz Israel, sort of like, okay, they're out there. But the relationship was still okay. They were still communicating. Onan, Tamar is still in the family with Onan. Okay? Relationship is good. A little bit removed because it's kind of a weird situation, but it's still there. They are still clearly Jews, still promised an inheritance amongst the people. Tamar still had, at this point with Onan, the promise of seed, of an inheritance. Okay? Do we see that? Yes, no? Okay. Onan, however, decided he did not want to complete this act of Torah, and he spilled his seed on the ground. The Hebrew translation of this from the Strong's definition can also read as, he cast off his seed on the earth, or to the earth. Here we have a prophetic shadow picture of the dispersion that would jeopardize the inheritance of Tamar and her people. Onan, the text says, did this lest he should give seed unto his brother. He is basically saying, Tamar is out. Tamar is out. Don't want her in the family anymore. Okay? Cast out to the earth or to the nations. Now let's return to the text. Then said Judah to Tamar his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah my son be grown. For he said, I am afraid that he will die also as his brethren did. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. Here we have a picture of the promise of Messiah. The root of Shelah, right there, Shin, Lamed, He, is the same as that of Shiloh. We're all familiar with that word. I propose that the statement could read, till Shiloh my son be grown, a reference to Messiah ben David, the ruler of the tribe of Judah. Interestingly, the word here for be grown, gadal, is represented as an incomplete act of the future. It is noteworthy that Yit Gadal is a reference for the Jewish Kaddish, the mourner's prayer, in which they refer to the coming of Messiah and the Messianic age. Could it be, hypothesis, could it be that the Sephardic people were sent away to conceal themselves and live in seclusion outside of the land in a desolate place until the Messiah were to come? Remember, we're prophecy and fulfillment. Through the years, anti-Semitism increased, and time again, the Jewish people in Iberia were persecuted and pushed towards conversion, to no longer be Jews, to be something else. Many of the Sephardic Jews who had become anusim or conversos, converted to Catholicism's Christianity, or faced certain death. They had the choice, go one way or the other, but they were always considered as second-class citizens. Under the edict of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain, and eventually a similar edict in Portugal, because some of them left Spain and went to Portugal, the Jews whose ancestors had left before the siege of Babylon and found refuge in the Iberian Peninsula were now fleeing for their lives, or else feigning conversion to save the same. It was only through deception and careful concealing their identity that they had hope of claiming their vital inheritance as the ruling tribe of Israel. After the death of 2 of his 3 sons, Judah decided to send Tamar back to live with her father. Go back to your own house. Genesis 38:11 says, to remain a widow in her father's house, or to sit down in a desolate place. To sit down in a desolate place is another Hebrew understanding. To return back to your father's house, when you see that in Scripture, and the woman must return to her father, is to go back to a desolate place.